I thought that one of the reasons that writing out of and within African American culture was precisely this load of information from everywhere. In my own family, the mixture between, in the language, there was street language, there was sermonic language. You know, people actually quoted the Bible to you as a child and said, you know, nothing is more, and I'm not going to remember one of them, but they had biblical phrases in regular conversation. Or they had lyrics from songs. Or they had journalism. So that they pulled from everywhere.
Though Vivian Medithi was kind enough to wrap the review up beautifully in anti-Black antagonisms before presenting it in time for the holidays, like a well-intentioned bike, the unmistakability of its shape all but spoiled the surprise. Published exactly 1 week after the mixtape's release on December 2nd, and boldly titled, "On the Pilot, Mavi Chooses Stardom Over Artistry," one still can't help their disappointment upon peeling back the wrapping paper. It reads with a scathing list of grievances, from allegations of rudimentary rhyme schemes to thematic and moral abandonment. It's easy to imagine that the pilot is a hollow and disorienting installment in a line of otherwise candid storytelling, and that Medithi is expertly voicing opinions of more senior fans. But it isn't. The pilot is a reflection of Mavi's newfound sobriety necessitated by the contents of previous projects, his continued success as a rapper, and the journey of fully integrating the self through acknowledging his actions before and as a result of fame. He continues to offer up his complicated truths, regardless of whether we can parse through the subtleties, and rightfully keeping for himself a couple secrets that's too deep for rhyming with. It's because of how Mavi communicated his struggles previously that I can celebrate the bittersweetness alongside him in the 6th track, 31 Days. The painful earnestness of "I'm done grieving, I love people, but I'm crumbling, so don't hug me," hits me every time I hear it. And as someone who has long ranted about how the casual use of "how are you" erodes the intimacy needed to answer it truthfully, the refrain of "I feel, got another mouth to fill, got another crowd of tears, you don't even got the time to hear it, really, don't ask me how I feel," has a similar aching familiarity. There are people who love you who genuinely want to know how you're feeling, yet most often when people ask, it functions more as a call and response than an actual invitation to share the messy, heavy reality. How am I? I'm good. You? Despite this levity, the mixtape remains colored by the inescapable oxymoron that is Black life, especially for Mavi, who has come into more money from writing words than he ever did jugging, or would have had he gone on to study neuroscience like he planned, and he knows it. That knowing forces him to grapple with the irony and acknowledge where he falls into the well-tread steps of rappers before him, spending money on family, cars, drugs, lovers, and finery, while staying with his mama and prolonging the stability that he needs. It's a vicious cycle of magic tricks and band-aids needed to conjure the confidence to write and to perform the persona of rapper, no matter how conscious of the cage one may be. There are a few main elements that make up the persona of the rapper: ego, desirability, capital, perceived authenticity, and living death.
This is for you. A dog mare? What, you want to be in politics? Run around not in the park, but in the offices? Roll around in the city hall? Might catch some politics? What's that smell? Oh right, you're a dog, it's a pile of shit. You getting itchy? I can try to shave ya. That's the offer. She tried to poison Idlewild's minds with her lies. Maybe it's my turn to condition her. What's that smell? Oh right, you're a sham, so is poo. You know, Mayor Karen Bass that's a fish. What is this, Zootopia? Psych, Pooptopia. You're like a worm with no ring. I'm a mean girl. Why you trying to make fetch a thing? Hey bruh, come fetch my thing. Let me throw you a bone.
I didn't get the bone.
Huh? Sorry, what's up?
I didn't bring the bone. I thought it was like a wordplay thing.
Somebody ought to take bruh to the pound.
Please do not talk to me like that.
The usually unspoken innate part is Blackness itself, because it is that which creates the living death and thus the desire to be a rapper, to try and ascend from this specific epistemological circle of hell. Therefore, non-blacks who rap or employ blackness aren't included by my definition. They use the aesthetic of blackness to reap the marketability of grit and sexuality until they acquire just enough capital to cash out for whiteness and retire their nigga suits. But that's for a different day. The rapper's perceived authenticity relies on how their performance and relaying of blackness is received through their employment of the elements themselves. Hence why some rappers fare better with non-blacks and are characterized differently, even if they do speak to relatable aspects of blackness. Patriarchy also gets an honorary mention here, but since it is foundational to the world, or the place that we inhabit that was formed and shaped by anti-blackness, colonialism, and capitalism that we call the world, shout out to Deshaun Harrison, it almost goes without saying. All rappers are aware of this to some degree, even if they wouldn't put it exactly like that. What's a rapper without a chain, a couple blicks, and the aura to make us believe they'll come out on top if a nigga tries to take it? What's a rapper that's been seen not holding their own? The tide shifts. This is what it means to be a rapper. To constantly labor against returning to the conditions that made you start rapping in the first place, but not being able to abandon it completely because it's what keeps you credible and paid, and for some, what defines their entire sense of self. Ascended, yet in purgatory. An eternal catch-22, unless you can use that momentum to propel yourself elsewhere.
Play for keeps, love for cheap, pulling B&Es. Disbelief, trying to see the way she's seeing me. Feel like everything I eat seem to feed a leech. I just sink to reach my dreams, I ain't sleep a wink. Picking out the lock like BDBs, I'm 3 degrees from priesthood to precinct. Seen enough to know that God is real. The sight of spell to rise like Braille, you can feel the words. Revenge best served as dessert, I try to kill the urge.
Medithi's review attempts to convince through toothless implication that Mavi is a sellout. More fervently, I will insist that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. What Medithi excels in instead is audacity. As a non-black, primarily paying the bills through reviewing an ontology in a genre that they don't quite understand, I'd imagine it's needed in abundance to constantly fend off the angry ancestral forces hot on their trail. With cheeky, sarcastic sentence structure, Medithi stumbles through an expanse of baseless accusations with nothing but cherry-picked examples and bad faith, all while sneering at a lack of authenticity that their eyes have apparently been keenly trained to recognize. They employ the kind of toxicating mix of emotions that arises when facing a threat amongst friends, akin to bravery, yet not quite. Bravado, mayhaps? After all, they are, in a way, amongst friends. A junior partner of civil society, as Frank B. Wilderson III puts it, their position at Fader is one of legitimacy within the wild, wild realm of nigga music, and Medithi certainly uses their word count to throw their weight around as sheriff. If you haven't had the displeasure of reading it for yourself, you may be wondering,
Man, what did he do to make them niggas that mad?
well, last summer, Mavi told the Fader the best rapper doesn't exist. Quote, "Black people's lives are judged on how impressive you are, on some basketball card shit, slave chattel worker shit," end quote, he said, adding that nobody asks who's the best painter or the best poet. It was a thoughtful consideration of how we value and critique hip-hop as a commodity rather than an art form, though that's no surprise coming from Mavi. Since his 2019 debut, the North Carolina rapper has been exploring Black liberation in his own furtive psyche on waxed with honed clarity. So it's a little disheartening that these heady, urgent concerns have been shunted to the side on his first major label release, The Pilot. Quote, "Greatest rapper in Charlotte history? Oh my motherfucking mama, I'll bet my advance on it, pussy." Mavi smirks near the end of Giannis Freestyle. New fans and casual listeners are liable to agree. But across the album, Mavi deliberately withdraws from the confessional style that previously shaped his discography and culminated in 2024's transcendent Shadowbox. Instead, the bulk of his latest is preoccupied with designer brands, some for Mavi, some for various paramours, and bag chasing. He'd really like $1 million. Despite how polished and poised his latest effort indeed is, the beats are warm and sumptuous, his flows are fluid and agile. This thematic retreat leaves a void that, however small, is sorely felt. To be fair, hedonistic impulses have always woven through Mavi's music. He's never been one to thumb his nose at the street rappers and contemporary sound kits that define mainstream hip-hop. After all, his 2019 album Let the Sun Talk began by acknowledging that to be black means to relentlessly pursue money, land, guns, and useful knowledge. But it certainly is odd to hear Mavi eagerly rapping about robbing, keeping the heat, popping oxys, sniping women whose names he doesn't even know. We're so far off from the strained escapism of I'm so tired, let alone the womanist bent of self-love. I wouldn't go so far as labeling him a sellout.
Take ownership! You bullshit. Take ownership right now. That's what I did. No.
But where the tension between the carnal and political previously created complex valleys and peaks in his work, Pilot is overwhelmingly flat. To his credit, Mavi at least stopped short of calling his pursuits hoes, bitches, or fine shit, though that might have more to do with image maintenance. A line like, "They can't even tell that I rap how I dress," veers bewilderingly close to the sort of respectability politics Mavi previously thumbed his nose at. Like his threats of gun violence or the flashes of boilerplate misogyny, this regressive attitude is frustrating. Not because Mavi knows better, though he does, but because it undercuts the nuanced persona he's striving to portray. Even 31 Days, ostensibly about his newfound sobriety, kicks off with Mavi pulling his Audi into the Target parking lot, Cartier on the wrist, Glock in his pocket. Listening to his 2025 summertime single Jammers Anonymous with Neonte, it was easy enough to envision Mavi entering something akin to his Mr. Morale in the Big Steppers arc, rejecting the pedestal he's been placed on in favor of messier humanity. Instead, the pilot feels more like his GNX, a low-stakes project for a rapper to let loose and flex a little. What the album lacks in depth, it also refuses to make up for with stylistic complexity. The most troubling aspect of the pilot is Mavi's flow, as evidenced by Land Grab with Earl Sweatshirt. In 2019, Earl's cosign helped push Mavi to a wider audience near the very beginning of his career, one circuitous lyricist passing the torch to a potential heir apparent. But Mavi's flow, once coiled and languid, twisting in on itself in a stream of consciousness, has now become so clean as to feel indistinct. Earl, too, has been relaxing as a lyricist and rapping about sobriety this year, but the more legible style seems in service of communicating more directly with his audience. Paired with the thinner thematics, the pilot sands off Mavi's idiosyncrasies in favor of easy consumption. These songs will probably be easier for a crowd to sing back at him than Chinese Finger Trap or The Sky is Quiet, and likely make easier entry points for newcomers than the thicket of verses on preceding albums. But the qualities that made Mavi more than a cool artist, the unvarnished candor, his conscientious commitment to Black empowerment, the wise beyond his years' maturity and razor-sharp wit that set him apart as a great rapper, are now in short supply. The pilot opens with the assertion, "I'm the best dressed nigga on my therapist's couch," but the rest of Heavy Hand offers minimal detail on what brought him there, or what he's taking away from his sessions. Before, Mavi might have talked you through those emotions. Right now, he's got that shit on, and he'd rather be seen than heard.
Man, what the fuck is you talking about? What the fuck was that? I'm sorry, man.
Medithi opens innocently enough by quoting from the interview they did for the Fader for Mavi's last album, Shadowbox. What Mavi said in full was,
I've been in the museums a lot, and it was fucking Van Gogh and Monet in the Met, right? They're two still lives of some sunflowers. One is by Van Gogh, one is by Monet. And on the placard of the Monet painting, Van Gogh is talking about how he likes Monet's still life better than his still life. And that made me think, there are a lot of cultural forces that make hip hop competitive, beyond it just being this healthy youth culture that we purport it to be. Some of those things is like the dehumanization of black people that comes from slavery, or black people's lives are judged on how impressive you are, or some basketball card shit, slave chattel worker shit. So it made me think, like, what does it mean to be the best rapper? And then it made me think, who's the best painter? Like, that's not even a question we ask. Who's the best poet? Who's the best writer? I don't really think that's really a thing that exists. And it's part of a force within the black community to be like the most impressive black person to the outside, aka white gaze, that motivates this will to step on every other rapper in order to shine alone in the light. So when I really broke that down to myself, it's like, what am I even trying to fucking do if I make the best rap album? I can just make my best rap album, you know? I can just paint this shit in my style, the way I see it, the best. And I don't know what better than that actually is, you know? I don't know what I could do better than that. That's all I can do. Nas, when he released his first album, he was a kid rapping about his fucking project from Queens. And we attached all sorts of literary value to the fact that he's a kid from the project from Queens and seeing stuff and can recount it. The things that are critically or commercially the best are just stuff where they have strong perspective and they have strong style. And both of those things for me is related to honest accounts of how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what my life is made of. So I can just lean into that.
I was tickled by their decision to use this quote because it obviously went over their head, but it also perfectly illustrated why Medithi being a rap critic is as ill fitting as a cheap suit. It also demonstrates their fundamental misunderstanding of blackness, Mavi as an artist, and quite literally the words coming out of that nigga's mouth. Such crossed wires are commonplace in the 2024 interview titled Mavi's Search for Meaning, where every follow-up question seems more focused on sounding intellectual than engaging in genuine dialogue. It reminded me of Frank Wilderson's infamous interview for KPFA Radio and Lindsey Gibson's with The Times, because both interviewers spend the duration asking questions that would have immediately been answered by engaging with the text, yet seem so perfectly pleased with themselves for thinking them up. There's an obvious difference in forming a question from engaging with something and forming a question from the idea of engaging with something, and they all reeked of the latter. Medithi opens with asking about his thoughts on then presidential candidates using rappers for clout. And if that doesn't make you immediately roll your eyes, we may not share the same distaste for liberal and at times leftist beliefs. I get the strong impression that Medithi loves the way words sound to the point that they lose function. They seem to obsess over the shape of Mavi's words and at times attempts to will them into a shape that they find satisfactory. I can't give one example without reading the entire interview because it opens on a bad question and then each one after is subsequently taken from the least interesting part of the response and then dominoes. Since this will be quote heavy enough, I recommend reading it for yourself. But back to the quote at hand. It wasn't about how we value and critique hip-hop as a commodity rather than an art form. He specifically says Black people because our lives are made spectacle regardless of fame. It is the spectacle that creates our notability to non-Blacks in the first place. I will argue that personhood and living as we understand them are antithetical to Blackness, but analytically, the point still remains. In I'm So Tired, a Shadowbox track Vivian hearkens to as a beacon of better times, Mavi puts it plainly.
I'm a nigga, no eluding the skin that I'm bonded with. I'm not a human.
Which speaks deliciously to the theory put forth by Afro-Pessimism. One of the central tenets of Afro-Pessimism, which expands upon the erudite work of Orlando Patterson, is a reoriented understanding of the composition of slavery. Instead of being defined as a relation of forced labor, It is more accurately thought of as a relation of property. The slave is objectified in such a way that they are legally made an object, a commodity, to be used and exchanged. It is not just their labor power that is commodified, as with the worker, but their very being. As such, they are not recognized as a social subject and are thus precluded from the category of human. Inclusion and humanity being predicated on social recognition, volition, subjecthood, and the valuation of life. The slave, as an object, is socially dead, which means they are 1. Open to gratuitous violence, as opposed to violence contingent upon some transgression or crime. 2. Natally alienated, their ties of birth not recognized and familial structures intentionally broken apart. And 3. Generally dishonored or disgraced before any thought or action is considered. The social death of the slave goes to the very level of their being, defining their ontology. Thus, according to Afro-Pessimism, the slave experiences their slaveness ontologically as being for the captor, not as an oppressed subject who experiences exploitation and alienation, but as an object of accumulation and fungibility, exchangeability. After the non-event of emancipation, slavery did not simply give way to freedom. Instead, the legal disavowal of ownership reorganized domination, and the former slave became the racialized black subject, whose position was marked epidermally, per Frantz Fanon. As an Afro-pessimist, one of my favorite things about Mavi is his ability to embody the duality of living, which is balancing the material and the spiritual, while socially dead and working in a field, pun intended, that makes niggas' fungibility so abundantly clear. Mavi understands the meta-commentary of being a rapper in this body in this world. Vivian does not. I'm not sure if Mavi is an Afro-pessimist per se, or if he's referencing this specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was. Or if the thought sprang up independently in his own introspection, because it can be felt even when lacking the words to describe it. It's why Black children learn to internalize that they are ugly, why the Natasha doll could only be as popular as it is because of its Blackness, and why there will always be some legal justification for the extinguishing of Black life. I don't expect Medithi to be well versed on Afro-pessimist ideology, but I did expect that they would at least understand where niggas is coming from, since often entrenching themselves in their experiences. A fool's thought. I should banish it. Medithi reveals their hand in the second paragraph. Using the quote was an attempt to hang Mavi with his own rope, again, pun intended. I went back and forth on whether I should break this down paragraph by paragraph for the poorly written anti-Black hallucination that it is, but rereading it not only shaves years off of my life, it also reaffirms its own bad faith. Medithi tells on himself often and without provocation. Mavi has failed to fulfill his role as pensive slave and becomes unremarkable in what Medithi perceives as a shameless display of niggatry, when that isn't the kind of rapper he is, or as Medithi grimly implies, intentionally branded himself as. And besides, the tape speaks for itself. Every time I hear it now, I can't help but ponder aloud the audacity needed to conjure such wickedness. The only thing I can truly credit Medithi for is the effortless, why do I want to say that? The only thing I can truly credit Medithi for is the effortless way he has managed to live rent-free in my head in this economy. A real feat. Brava. I refuse to spend more time engaging with this with better faith than what got us here. However, there are 3 things that I absolutely have to discuss. One of them being the Mr. Morale comparison. Can we stop doing this? Can we literally stop doing this? Can, like, every time there is a rapper who talks about, like, sort of the meta experience of being a nigga and what it's like to be a rapper, any rapper who takes himself seriously, can we stop comparing him to Kendrick? There are more niggas out there. There are more niggas out there. And plus, like, Kendrick is very insightful. I won't take that from him. Very introspective. But like, can we stop acting like he is the goddamn glass ceiling for like any sort of thoughtfulness? Like, it reminds me of the fact that like people constantly say that my husband looks like J. Cole simply because he has locks and is soft spoken. What are we doing here? But anywho, here are the lyrics to Jammers Anonymous, and here are the lyrics to a song from the pilot. Can you guess which one is which? Secondly, Mavi does in fact call women hoes. How you giving this nigga credit for something he ain't even do? I guess the same way you make a whole review rejecting nuance and then not implying that this nigga is a sellout. But I digress. And thirdly, the assertion that the pilot lacks what made Shadowbox transcendent and that that's inherently a bad thing is embarrassingly what was I gonna say? And thirdly, the assertion that the pilot lacks what made Shadowbox transcendent and that that's inherently a bad thing is embarrassingly sophomoric. You can't hit it out of the park every time. And beyond that, continuously sitting in the darkness needed to conjure something so profound is only conducive to suffering. It isn't a lush, romantic place. It's fiendishly hungry. Nor is that a real benchmark of anything. The joy of becoming lies within improvement. That is part of the spirit of the pilot, as Mavi spoke about how he wished he hadn't performed Shadowbox as much as he did because of its weight and his desire to embrace levity moving forward in his recent interview with Andre G.
You know how you talk about like that inner child? Like with that inner child, bro, like there is a demon that grew up with that nigga, bro. Like I used to see shadows in my room all the time when I was a kid, bro. Like, I was ADHD. My mom used to think it was the meds. The meds, they took me up off of, and I was still seeing the same shadows. And it was like, I was still like, had them same dreams, everything else. He used to have dreams about the world and then everything else. Like, but that child, it grow up. And that demon do too. It get bigger. And it's like, you gotta learn how to kill that motherfucker, bro. You can't let that just keep haunting your life. So and you say like you know too much now. Like you can't be like, oh yeah, I know too much. Like you gotta be like, bro.
So how you kill him?
I can see you. I can see you. I can see you. I can see you. I can. Oh, I can see. Yeah.
I think I did more shows at Shadowbox than what I should have. That music is really, it's like a black hole. It's small but super dense and super cold. You suck all the heat and love out of the air or surrounding space. So I think traveling the literal earth and doing the most dates I've ever done of that music, it had a dual effect. One was my self-perception became super shaky and negative. It already was because of what was going on in my life before I released it. And two, I got really tired of the content of the music actually being my state of affairs. And so, as I kept performing this music, I'm like, damn, I'm sick of this. And then just my travels was like, yeah, I don't want this to be my life, this shit I'm talking about in this song.
6 days before Vivian's review, the Rolling Stone published Mavi on the pilot, Sobriety, and becoming one of rap's most intentional voices. Andre G and Mavi's second interview together after meeting for Shadowbox. In it, G quotes Mavi.
God responds to sacrifice across all spiritual traditions of earth. Frustration and sacrifice are part of it. There's a degree of smallness you got to access in order to get to the bigness.
Then continues. For Mavi, that expression takes shape in a healthier, more fulfilling personal life, and an environment that inspired a freer creative approach on the pilot. He's collaborating with other rappers, the aforementioned two, as well as Mike on Triple Nickel and Kenny Mason on Typewriter, which he had never done before on his own projects. Tracks like Silent Film and Giannis Freestyle especially feel like him trying his always pliant cadences off on sonics that defy expectations set by his prior catalog. Last year, he talked to me about a desire to be considered one of the best rappers. This year, it feels like his mindset has shifted.
Discovering my strength is more so like, yes, Mavi's a good rapper. Thanks. Appreciate it. Cool. But it's like, how do I advance? How do I challenge myself to mean more to my city and to the black community in this time of delicacy and fucking vulnerability and uncertainty? How do I continue to advance my vision for the arts?
That focus bleeds through all of his creative choices, including something as simple as getting his nails and hair done during his July Lyrical Lemonade lunch break freestyle.
I think the whole self destructive rapper thing is A, pathetic, and B, dangerous for the kids to perpetuate as a stereotype. So I'm on some shit like, nigga, I fuck with myself and I want to take care of myself and love myself in public. That's a powerful image for black men, especially.
I do think it's important to clarify how Best is functioning here, because I disagree with that bit, since Mavi explains it well himself in the aforementioned interview, Mavi on his new album, Shadowbox, and why he's in his Steve Nash era.
I don't think it's a best rapper or better rapper because there's no better painter or worse painter. But on that level of when we used to be in ninth grade on the bus, from that perspective, outside of the actual greatest to ever do this, I don't know anyone who is my age and of my generation pushing their own pen and rapping better than me.
And if we keep reading after that, he tells me that as a rapper who doesn't fit the rapidy rap mold, he feels like he has to do some propaganda work to get more people to agree with him, but he also feels like it's beneath him. Contrarily, I reference Jay-Z and Lil Wayne's Best Rapper Alive campaigns, and T.I.'s King of the South affirmation, noting that the self-fulfilling prophecy is very hip-hop.
That's true, especially because I buy chains and shit still.
He concedes, wearing a Mavi chain and a Cuban necklace.
If I'm gonna do some of it, I'm gonna do all of it. Fuck it. Now we going up. Watch. I'm gonna start. I don't know what's gonna be my attention seeking thing.
He seems to be joking, but if Mavi starts calling himself the best or has a control moment, blame me.
Funny. Yes, but not funny, haha. Funny, weird.
The quote in the recent interview speaks to a desire to move beyond the cultural milestone to tangible community impact, as opposed to a sudden shift in focus. But regardless, I think G does a great job in both interviews with actively listening, creating rapport, and asking interesting questions in turn. For Shadowbox, he opens with the anecdote of their meeting, and Mavi being amused at what G calls the fickle listening public for seemingly rewriting history on the mixed responses to then previous album Laughing So Hard It Hurts. They discuss how the budget constraints that prevented sampling for it pushed him to collaborate with contemporary artists, which ultimately led to the sound of Shadowbox, then that flows into the heart of the album. With emotive guitar plucks and vocals from Jordan Ward, Amindi, and Tempest, the composers nailed the warmth of a 70s soul sample as he depicts the pangs of addiction and despair with bars like,
Perform surgery on myself with just a cudgel. I'm more certain about my death than my construction.
He tells me that the song, like the rest of the album, reflects where he's been personally while coping with unstable self-esteem.
It was days where outside of taking a shower and putting on a nice outfit, making sure I have some cologne that smells nice, the only thing I did the whole day that wasn't no type of self-hatred was record music. Otherwise, it's self-sabotaging relationships, toxic relationships, alcohol, drug abuse, phone addiction, nothing healthy.
On Junk Prayer, he laments,
Robot for the media.
When I ask about this line, he tells me that his annoyance is rooted in
Having to be an exemplar for certain things. I have to be a Howard University neuroscience student making intelligent rap music. But that's first, such a slim facet of who I am as a person. Second, it's brand new to my lineage and has debatable bearings on my actual sense of self. And also, I'm annoyed with having to be fucking inoffensive all the time.
inoffensive to who?
People's tastes, being stable, happy-go-lucky, good energy Mavi, even if that's not where my life is. It's been complicated because a lot of stuff I talk about on the album, I'm still in the throes of now. You ever did a press run depressed?
Since his breakout debut, Let the Sun Talk, Mavi has rightfully been perceived as a breath of fresh air in the hip-hop landscape. But sometimes, hip-hop pierced celebration of their appointed favorites can be dehumanizing, turning an artist into an avatar for hip-hop done right instead of a human being with nuance and pain. The title Shadowbox symbolizes
Trophy case to my failures. as a human. I wanted people to champion me for being a person who's learning more than champion me because of what they feel like I know or what they're proud to feel like I know.
Funny.
It's definitely interesting how much of this interview directly addresses Medithi's criticisms and how they were readily available to factor into the review beforehand, yet weren't. Beyond being petty and right, though, I genuinely appreciate the intention that Mavi brings to his music and the Black canon writ large. We need more thinkers who can meet people where they are and bring more holistic ways of thinking to the forefront. I'm also intimately aware of how uncomfortable vulnerability can be under the scrutinizing eyes of others. The consideration of his shadow self stemmed from a pair of impactful conversations. We hear one of them on Drown the Snake, where his friend implores him to kill the inner demon that grew up alongside his inner child. The interlude ends with Mavi asking, "So how you kill him?" He tells me that his friend Booker told him that it was an impossible task, because our shadows are with us all the time. And
it's the only way you really know that you're under the sun, that you exist. I realize demonizing that one part of me that physically never leaves me is symbolically evil. Politically, I didn't like that. And then I started to think, even if I want to use my physical shadow to symbolize parsing myself, that may be destructive. Destruction isn't inherently evil. It's the first step to construction, actually. So I'm like, let's build this shadow a place.
the pilot is the obvious continuation of this concept. Once you acknowledge there are parts of you that are less than pleasant and abiding, you can embrace life and different expressions of yourself fully without shame in the driver's seat. I believe that the material and the spiritual exist with simultaneous importance. To understand the world, Afro-pessimistically or not, without a tether to something greater, leaves one floating in the abyss of space and possibility. Which sounds exciting, but once the novelty wears off, what's left is the somber realization that sometimes ambiguity can be its own unique kind of hell. You need something that keeps you here and whole when the chaos life entails has just about convinced you to relinquish your earthly real estate. And it doesn't have to come from any pre-made religious template. I think it's better when you lay the bricks yourself and know exactly what your belief is built on. I sometimes fall into the same trap. The knot comes undone, and I lose myself amid the material, plagued with the reality of suffering, money, my childhood, my future. Nothing makes sense. Nuance is chastised, and the days move with a dull agony. I know the world runs on Blackbud. I have seen it eat the bones and all. And I know that everyone exists on purpose. It is our collective existence and suffering that changes the flavor of our perpetual primordial soup. Too many people outright reject the idea of Afro-Pessimism because they think it's resigning themselves to a bleak nothingness of an existence when they're desperate for the answer to end oppression today. The end of the world feels like a distant horizon they won't be around to see, and so they can't connect to it or resign themselves to what feels like powerlessness in an all-or-nothing situation. But I believe that nothing is ever really wasted. Everything that happens matters, and that the back and forth of conflict is greater evidence for progression than regression, and that Afro-pessimism isn't mutually exclusive to those ideas. How much we enjoy this life depends on the delicate balancing act of acknowledging what is and reaching towards what can be. Rebirth comes from sitting among the ashes of yourself. I think G put it well when he said, "Some of the depictions of paranoid gun-toting and drug-addled dysfunction paint a rough portrait, but they're part of the holistic depiction of who he is." In putting these troubling moments up to the light, he reflects self-awareness of his flawed ways, which is the first step to getting them in check. The album harkens to one of author Toni Morrison's most resonant observations. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art.
Instead of just being a child or a sort of naive escape story, it's about flight.
Yes.
It really is about flight. And flight comes up a lot in spirituals. I'll fly away. Oh, Jesus, I'll fly away.
Understandably.
Understandably.
Yes.
So what is there about that? It's probably escape. It's also the move away from earth into things that were more spiritual. I mean, it has a lot of connotations. So I'm thinking, how can I make a contemporary story about a black man, young black man, who learns to fly, or who makes his escape? Not geographical escape back to Africa, but another mindset.
Yes.
How does he escape the prison, the cultural prison that he found himself in?
Toni Morrison once said, in describing the connection between her beloved trilogy of seemingly unrelated books, Beloved, Jazz, and Paradise, the conceptual connection is the search for the beloved, the part of the self that is you and loves you and is always there for you. It's a quote that always really stuck with me, as someone infinitely interested with untangling the mess of my existence and the way that it's interwoven with others. But it was her third novel, Song of Solomon, that first came to mind while reading the interview. Firstly, because it speaks to the same spirit of hard-won acceptance, and secondly, because it begins and ends with flight. It's a very interesting book that I don't want to spoil completely. I highly recommend reading it. As soon as possible, even. Like, if you could pause this and then go read the book, that'd be like perfect, actually. If not, spoilers for several paragraphs throughout. The North Carolina mutual life insurance agent promised to fly from Mercy to the other side of Lake Superior at 3 o'clock. 2 days before the event was to take place, he tacked a note on the door of his little yellow house. At 3 p.m. on Wednesday, the 18th of February, 1931, I will take off from Mercy and fly away on my own wings. Please forgive me. I loved you all. You must face that you have done things that made sense to you at the expense of others. Accept the blame and find enough love for yourself to keep going. Accepting fault isn't easy, but neither is moving beyond the shame and self-flagellation that comes after it. Most people think that redemption lies here, that repentance requires a sentence of somberness, and anything less than morose is manipulative. But too much shame and smallness just makes you bitter, and bitterness festers. Milkman Dead is a victim of his own life in more ways than one. His parents' marriage is irreparably broken, and that flaw is not only a pervasive fact of, but also the sheer reason for his existence. This keeps them distanced emotionally from each other and their 3 adult children, despite still living under the same roof. Captive performers in their own dysfunction, yet unable to stop rehearsing the steps. Because of his proximity to wealth from his late doctor grandfather and his slumlord father, he's never faced the poverty defining the lives of the city's other black residents, including his best friend Guitar, who was evicted as a child from one of the latter's properties after his grandmother couldn't make rent. He lives sheltered by circumstance from personal experiences of anti-blackness or genuine empathy, developing an apathy for anything that isn't his concern. His race and the uptick of local arrests for murder, having any sort of relationship with his sisters, nor any real awareness around the delicate nature of hooking up with his cousin for the better part of a decade, then breaking up with her in a drugstore Christmas card. He's born and bred in smallness, and it dictates everything that he does. After surviving multiple assassination attempts and the weight of everything he had done thus far, Milkman is forced to reckon with himself. Instead of blaming others, as he had usually done, he finally just surrenders.
He stood up. "Guitar!" he shouted. "Tar, tar, tar," said the hills. "Over here, brother man. Can you see me?" Milkman cupped his mouth with one hand and waved the other over his head. "Here I am." Am, said the rocks. "You want me? Huh? You want my life?" Life. Squatting on the edge of the other flat-headed rock with only the night to cover him, Guitar smiled over the barrel of his rifle. "And my man," he murmured to himself. "My main man." He put the rifle on the ground and stood up. Milkman stopped waving and narrowed his eyes. He could just make out Guitar's head and shoulders in the dark. "You want my life?" Milkman was not shouting now. "You need it? Here." Without wiping away the tears, taking a deep breath, or even bending his knees, he leaped, as fleet and bright as a lodestar. He wheeled toward guitar, and it did not matter which one of them would give up his ghost in the killing arms of his brother. For now he knew what Shalimar knew. If you surrendered to the air, you could ride it.
There's an important distinction between forfeiting to the abyss and yielding to the unknown, despite how similar they can appear. While both spring from an acknowledgement of smallness, one is based in resignation and the other in trust. You can't stay small forever, and your life will ultimately keep giving you opportunities to grow bigger should you choose to see them that way. But you still gotta crawl before you walk. In order to really exercise control over your life, you have to accept without bitterness just how much is outside of it. Who you're related to, how people react to you, how those experiences shaped you in all of your most unsavory innermost parts. Find the beloved, it's easier to imagine a new path without being weighed down by what is. You can trust that the way forward is wherever your footsteps take you after. There's an understandably desperate call for soft lives, but the conditions that make up the world will make them impossible until it is destroyed and built anew. I also think that life can never promise us a never-ending season of simple ease because it's the integration of grief that makes us who we are. And when we live as ourselves, we move the grand plot forward. Some changes exist outside the scope of our control and are instead beholden to the constraints of time, context, and the stars aligning just so. Others are patiently awaiting our arrival should we choose to leave our comfort zone and take flight.